Hey everybody, in today's video we're going to take a detailed look at the Z series 24mm f1.8. We're then going to be comparing that directly to the f-mount 24mm 1.8 and also the f-mount 24mm 1.4. Just before we get into this video, I'm just going to let you know that this is being recorded on a Z6 with the 24mm f1.8 prime lens. That's why my field of view looks so weird. And I'm not used to having the camera where it is. It's normally further back, so arm's length is here. So we're going to look at the Z series 24mm versus the f-mount 24mm. We're going to look at picture quality. I'll show you some of the examples that I've taken with the lens whilst I've been out and about, just give you some real world shots that I've taken as well. And then also we'll look at video quality. So obviously this video being recorded with a 24mm right now, but also just talk about, is there any focus breathing? Bit of a spoiler, there's none at all. And then we'll look at kind of autofocusing speed and any kind of autofocusing noise that we can hear, comparing the Z series to the f-mount to see how they perform. Those of you that are waiting for the Z mount 24 versus the Z mount 24 to 70s, that video is on the way. It'll be up in a couple of days, so keep an eye out for that. I know that a lot of you are waiting for that one as well, but I decided to do them as separate videos because otherwise it would just be one really long video comparing loads of images together and it'll get a bit confusing. Those of you that follow me on Instagram would know that I've been using this lens out in the field. I've put it up on my Instagram stories so that you can see what I'm shooting with it, what camera body I'm using with it. So I've been using it with landscapes and also had filters in front of it as well, so I'll talk about some of those examples. I've been very impressed with this lens, and I'm not just saying that. I actually got to the point where I did think that the 24 to 70 2.8 was so good that I wouldn't necessarily be too concerned about using this lens. But I have kind of tracked back on that, and I do feel like I'm probably going to use this as a prime lens more than I do my 24 to 70. Let's get into the main part of this video. So we'll head over to Lightroom, but as always, I'm just going to show you the results, and it's your decision. It's up to you as to what you prefer, and I will obviously talk about what I think about the images that are in front of me and talk about my own experiences, but at the end of the day, I want you to be able to kind of see them side by side and go, actually, you know what? I prefer that lens or I prefer that lens, and you can disagree with me, that's perfectly fine. That's the whole reason of these videos. I just want to show you what it does and you make your own mind up. So let's go take a look at some picture quality tests first of all, and then after that, I will then probably run the focus breathing and the autofocusing tests on the back of that. Right, so I'd just like to start by showing you some of the shots that I've had a chance to take with the 24mm. So this particular shot here, the camera is definitely on tripod because this is f8 and 136 seconds. I have used filters, so in front of the lens there's a graduated 1.2 filter, which is about 4 stops, and there is a 10 stop ND filter as well. So the filters I use are pretty sharp, but just keep in mind that there will be filters in front of the lens and they obviously affect the performance of the lens. But what I wanted to show you is this is the shot straight out of camera, put into Lightroom, just to kind of look at the detail. So we're here at 1:1, and the detail kind of in the rust and the color and the sharpness is fantastic, especially considering that this is taken through 2 filters stacked in front of the lens as well. And especially for people who are thinking of using this lens for landscape photography, it's performed very well under filters, and I'll show you some more examples as we go. But just looking at this detail here in the foreground and down in the corner as well, still incredibly sharp. Obviously there's not much detail in the background because of the 136 second exposure, but overall happy with this shot and happy with the performance of it. If I was going to edit this shot, it would probably look something like this, just a bit more color and a bit more contrast. It's just the way that I prefer to edit my images. So here's another shot with the 24mm on a Z7, and it's a long exposure again, so I'm using filters again. I have the 1.2 medium graduated filter and then a 15 stop ND filter just to let me get to the 210 second exposure. Again, it's got two filters in front of it, so that will affect the picture quality. However, again, still very impressed. So if we look here at 1:1, the level of detail and sharpness in the boat is very apparent. Even if we go in at kind of 2:1, you can still see details in the wood and wonderful colors. So if I was going to edit this shot, I'd probably make it look something like this. Just a nice crop, so I've cropped the top and the bottom off just to kind of give it a panoramic type look, and then just a bit of enhancement to kind of sharpness and detail, and a bit more contrasty. Again, I like kind of contrasty shots. Right, so this is just obviously a rusted door, and again f8, and we're at 250th of a second here. So this is still on a tripod, but it's not a long exposure. We don't have any filters. I just took this as just kind of like an example of a detailed shot. So we'll look at this at 1:1. So at 1:1, nice detail and sharpness in the center of the frame, as you would expect, even right to the edges. So right to the edge of the frame, and then right into the corners of the frame, there's almost no loss of detail. We're still wonderfully sharp and detailed here. Only really maybe gets a tiny bit softer up right in the extreme corners of the frame, but edge to edge, it's wonderfully detailed and wonderfully sharp. Here we have a shot taken at f1.8, which is what you would never really shoot at for a type of shot like this, because it just doesn't give you the correct depth of field. To be able to shoot at that 1.8, I needed a shutter speed of 5,000th of a second. Gives you an idea of how bright it was on this particular day. Now, I just wanted to show you some of the details in this rock here. Even when we're at 1.8, we can see that it's wonderfully sharp. Details in the waves as they're breaking. Obviously, because we're at 1.8, the depth of field is quite thin, so we do start to lose sharpness towards the background, as you would expect, because normally you would take this shot at f8 or f11, but even wide open in a shot like this at 1.8, it's incredibly sharp and detailed. So this again is another long exposure on a tripod, obviously, f8 and then 465 seconds to get this shot, and it is still slightly underexposed. But again, this would have been with a 1.2 medium graduated filter and a 10 stop filter at sunset. It's getting darker and darker and darker, and that's why I can shoot for so long even with a 10 stop filter. I will just slightly brighten up the exposures very quickly, just so that we can see at 1:1, it's wonderfully sharp and detailed, as you would expect at f8, to be honest. Even at 2:1, still real happy with the performance and the detail that we can pull out of it. So if I was going to edit this shot, I might edit to something that looks like this, just a bit more detail in the sky and just bringing out the color of the lighthouse. Right, so this is obviously a shot taken at night. I've manual focused the lens out of focus just to show you how it treats pinpoint light sources and how it renders out of focus and all that type of stuff. So we're obviously at 1.8, I'm at 200th of a second, it's handheld and it's at 1000 ISO. Pretty good across the board. In the middle, really nice and circular. Changes shape to the edges slightly, but not massively. There is, so you can see that in some of the balls, there's a bit of orange peel effect, but nothing too distracting. So this is an image shot at night. I'm at 200th of a second, handheld, f1.8, so we're wide open. And the way that it handles this shot, I think it handles it really well. If we zoom in, first of all, we can see it's nice and sharp, manages the bright area of the lights. There's not too much kind of flaring, and even in the corners, kind of the headlights and the tail lights are well controlled. Nice and detailed. Over here we could read that number plate, just give you an idea of how small that is in the frame. This area here is soft because of the shutter speed. So that car is moving faster than the 200th of a second shutter speed. But overall, just impressed with the quality of the shot like this. So this is another shot taken handheld at a quarter of a second. So I'm kind of leaning on the in-body stabilization here with a Z7. So this is, you know, if there was ever going to be any motion blur, it would be quite apparent. I'm at f4. The slow shutter speed is so that I get the movement in the train. But even if we kind of look at details, you see this sign here is nice and sharp. We lose a bit of the depth of field back here, but if we look up into the ceiling, which is in the depth of field, we're still nice and sharp. For a shot that's taken handheld at a quarter of a second, I'm very impressed with the results that we've got and the nice motion blur in the train as it goes past. This was just a test to see how it performs with the in-body stabilization and shooting handheld on a Z7. Okay, so time to start with the 24mm comparisons. So on the left-hand side, we have the Z series 24mm 1.8, and on the right-hand side, we have the F mount 24mm 1.8, both on the same Z7. Obviously, the F mount using the FTZ adapter. So let's go take a look at these and compare them side by side, both at 1.8. Before we look at the detail in terms of sharpness, what I did want to mention is that I do notice that the Z series 1.8 does vignette quite heavily at 1.8. So you can see a lot of shadowing in the corner here, somewhat a bit more than the F mount 24mm lens does. That vignette does disappear when you stop the lens. Even if you stop up to f2.8, you'll notice that the vignette starts to disappear. So it's not too distracting from a landscape point of view, but those of you that want to shoot the lens wide open at 1.8, just be aware that it does give you vignetting in the corners of the lens wide open. Right, so here we are at 1:1 first of all. Z series on the left, F mount on the right. And we can see straight away, wide open, that the Z series lens is sharper at 1.8, and we've kind of started to expect that, so there's no real surprises there. At 2:1, that just becomes even more noticeable. What also becomes more noticeable as well is that the F mount has slightly more color fringing. You can see a lot of green on this edge here, whereas we don't get that with the Z series lens. Let's go check corners. So here we are, not quite in the corner yet, but just off center, the difference is very apparent. So in terms of sharpness, the Z series 24 is considerably sharper than the F mount 24 1.8. And as we would expect, right down in the corner of the frame, the difference is not that big, but the Z series lens is sharper. Okay, so now we're here at 2.8, Z series on the left, F mount on the right. We can see that now we're at 2.8, the vignetting is drastically reduced in the corners of the frame between the two lenses. So let's go take a look at sharpness at f2.8. So at 1:1, it's quite difficult to see the difference between the two. The F mount lens is really sharpened up, being stopped down from 1.8 to 2.8, which is what you would expect, but they look almost identical. So here we are at 2:1, and the Z series lens is still quite a long way sharper. It's a lot more obvious now, and that's even in the center of the frame. So just go have a look towards some of the edges. This area here still looks much more detailed. A lot more contrast in this area. This is kind of just appears nice and smooth on the F mount lens, but yet we can still see the individual lines of the paint on the Z series. So all round just better detail. And if we go right to the edge, again, the Z series lens is just significantly sharper in the corners, even at f2.8. Okay, so both here at f5.6, Z on the left, F mount on the right. We'll take a look at 1:1 first of all, and as we would expect, it's very difficult to see any difference at 1:1. We shall take a look at 2:1. Okay, so at 2:1, at the center of the frame, it's very difficult to determine which one is sharper. They look almost identical. All of the fringing has gone from the F mount version as well. So we'll take a look at the edges. So at the very edges of the frame, the F mount 24mm is still softer, but not by a massive amount. And especially if you're looking at using these lenses at f5.6, f8, f11, there's not going to be a huge difference in terms of sharpness between the two. But wide open, as we've seen, there is a very big difference between them when they're wide open. Here we have Z mount 24 1.8 on the left and F mount 24 1.4. Let's go check and compare sharpness. So here we are at 1:1, Z mount at 1.8 and F mount at 1.4. So we can see straight away, even at 1:1, that the Z series lens is sharper and that the F mount lens is struggling from purple fringing on the white text that is non-existent on the Z series lens. Because the F mount lens is at 1.4, we can see that we do get a smoother depth of field in the background versus the 1.8 of the Z mount, as we would expect with the different aperture settings. So let's go take a look at 2:1. So at 2:1 we can see that the Z series lens is significantly sharper and has much better control of its colors. You see the edges of these squares, they're all really nice and sharp, whereas with f-mount 1.4 you can see that the edges of the squares look softer and the colors are much less controlled, and also we can see how the purple fringing is affecting the text here as well at 2:1. So we'll go and check corners to see if there's any difference down there, and again, as we've come to expect, Z series is sharper in the corners than the f-mount is, especially because the f-mount's currently wide open at 1.4. Over here we can see the extent at which the f-mount 1.4 is struggling with the fringing versus the Z series 1.8. Right, so here we have both lenses now stopped down to 1.8. So the 24 Z series 1.8 on the left and the f-mount 24 1.4 but stopped down to 1.8 on the right. So let's go take a look, see what we can see. So first of all, at 1:1 we can really see that the f-mount 1.4 has sharpened up drastically and pretty much all of its color fringing has disappeared. So obviously that was only really there when we were at 1.4. So 1.8's got rid of that. Let's take a look at 2:1. Okay, so at 2:1 the Z series lens is still sharper, especially in terms of this area here. There's a tiny bit of color fringing on the f-mount, and also these colored squares generally just sharper and better controlled on the Z series lens than they are on the f-mount lens. If we look in the corners, see if there's any difference down there. So just off center of the frame we can see that the Z series lens is much sharper than the f-mount 24 1.4. Just a lot more detail here in the paint, a bit more contrasty in this area here as well. So overall, just off center, detail, sharpness, areas of contrast and micro contrast, the Z series lens looks better. And then right in the corner, the Z series lens is still sharper. So f-mount still struggles. The f-mount lens is still struggling with that corner sharpness, even when it's been slightly stopped down. So we'll go take a look, see if that gets any better or worse. Okay, so here we are at f5.6. I've skipped 2.8 because the results were very similar to what they were at 1.8, similar sharpness in the middle, but yet the Z series still being sharper at the edges. So we'll have a look at 5.6, see if there's any difference there. Z series on the left, f-mount on the right. So as you can see at 1:1, they are identical realistically at f5.6, and even at 2:1. The Z series lens is just ever so slightly sharper. Again, just better control kind of on the edges of these corner boxes. The white text is just ever so slightly sharper at 2:1, but this is nothing you would see in the real world, and it's just shows you kind of how sharp that f-mount lens can be, but only when it's really stopped down. The Z series lens still remains to be sharp even when wide open. The key thing is that no matter how much you stop down the f-mount lens, it doesn't really get anywhere near as sharp as the Z series lenses in the corners, and that's just going to be down to the different design of the lens and the mount design, which allows you to have considerably better sharpness across the frame. So we'll never really see that improve. So to summarize, the f-mount 24 1.4 can be almost as good as the Z series 24 1.8, only when it's stopped down though. So if you're using a 24mm lens wide open, the best lens is going to be that Z series lens. If you're stopping them down, there's less of a difference, but you're really going to notice the difference in sharpness and detail in the corners of the frame, just not so much in the center of the frame. Right, well, I hope you found this video useful, and I hope that it's helped you understand how good this 24mm lens is so far. As I mentioned at the start of the video, those of you that are waiting for Z series 24mm versus Z series 24-70s, those videos are on the way. I will compare it against the f2.8 and the f4, so do keep an eye out for those. And then the big video that a lot of people have asked for, which has proven to take a lot of time to put together, but hopefully it'll be worth it in the end, is the primes versus the zooms. So the 24mm prime, the 35mm prime, the 50 prime and the 85 prime versus the 24-70. Is that 24-70 2.8 or 24-70 f4 so good that we don't really get much of a difference with the prime lenses? And that's what we're going to find out in that video, so that is also on the way. Keep an eye out for that. Right, well, thank you very much for watching. I do really hope that you found this video useful. If you do have any questions, please put them in the comments below. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.